TV. Open the meeting for the planning board meeting for the 17th of September. Welcome, everyone. I'm Hazel Nurse, the chairman of the board. Jenny Gingras is our town planner on my far left. And I'd like to welcome Christina Kelleher, our new board member, who was filling the vacancy which we have on the board, and will fill it until the next town election. So welcome, and we're delighted to have you with us. John Pizzoni, next to my left, and Mark Silverberg on my far right. We're missing one member who will be delayed and should be here by hopefully 7:15-ish. So because of that, I'm going to rearrange the agenda slightly in that we will still have the waste management sewer discussion moratorium from the DPW director, Chris Payant, and then we will do the zoning articles, which are going to be on the October town meeting warrant, and then we will do the public meetings and hearings. So Chris, can I turn this over to you?
Okay, good evening, everybody. Chris Payant, Director of Public Works. I don't know if there's something specific you wanted to address. I know you just wanted to kind of talk about the, I guess, what's going on with the comprehensive wastewater management plan. I have the presentation that was presented to the select board. I can kind of run through that, or if you just had questions, whatever.
I think if you could run through that, that'd be very helpful, okay. Particularly helpful for people that are watching, who may not have seen it at the Board of Selectmen.
And I can do that relatively quickly, and we can get to the discussion. So I'll just give a quick recap. I'll talk about this report and the next steps. Okay, I guess you can see the slide. So just to remind everybody, we've been involved in this comprehensive wastewater management plan update for a couple of years now. And the intent of that is to analyze our sewer system, our wastewater management system, and ultimately propose recommendations for improvements or to the system, or enlarging the system, or doing something to increase our capacity to manage wastewater. So it's a big process, lots of phases, but our current step right now, and the important one for the town, is to look at the capacity we have and what we're projecting for the future. And that's what I'm going to be talking about in just a few minutes. So going into this, everybody's aware that in May we implemented a moratorium, and the reason for that was because early on in this process we assumed but didn't have the data to show us that we were overcommitted in terms of what we've permitted, meaning what we are allowing people to send to the plant, and we believed we were over what we actually were allowed to send to the plant. So we've committed written checks to people that we couldn't necessarily cash, so to speak. So that's why we were doing this study. And then this table here just shows what the plant allows. So 7.68 is the total, that's 1 million gallons per day, and 2.89 is what Westborough is allowed. So this is just a summary chart from a memo that's been published, is posted. It breaks down our analysis of flows. And so I'll just quickly walk through the table left to right. So column 1, which is that orangish reddish color, that's recognizes 2.89, which is the limit we have by permit to the wastewater treatment plant. The columns in blue, so column 2 is what we've determined to be the current permitted flow. So based on permits or other assumptions that we've made, we've identified that 4.27 million gallons per day is what the town has said is permitted to various entities across the town. And then column 3 is what we project to be our needs over, in terms of time, we look 20 years, but really it's whenever the town has kind of reached its capacity for development. So that 0.35, which is 350,000 gallons, is what we project is needed for the future, and that total ends up being 4.62, which is column 4. So we've committed to 4.27, and 4.62 is what those numbers add up to if we want to talk permitted. The remaining 3 columns in green are what's actually going to the plant. So when stuff goes to the plant, it enters the plant through one big pipe and it's metered, and so we know exactly how much is going to the plant. And that comes out to about 2.07 million gallons a day, column 5. And then we've projected, and there's some math that's been done to scale things and get the numbers straight, but we've projected the actual flow to increase by about 0.5, which is about 500,000. So together that makes 2.57. So the important points on this slide are 2.89, which is column 1. That's our limit. Column 4, actually column 2 is 4.2, and that's what we're saying we've already committed to. So that's obviously more than 2.89. And column 7 is what we're saying would be the actual flow in the future. So those numbers are what we're looking at. And really what we're focused on right now is the blue. So the columns in blue, which are permitted. And we want to figure out if there's a way to get that 4.62 closer to 2.89, because we should be able to provide the capacity to those we've permitted and said we had the capacity to serve you. So that's our goal, is to get that number closer. So how are we doing that? So this presentation was given a month and a half or so ago to the select board, so it's talking from then, but basically what we've been doing is a couple of workshops. So we had one already, we have one tomorrow. That's with town staff. I'm going to talk a little bit more about those workshops, but we're looking at the assumptions we've used to calculate the numbers I just showed, and can we revise those assumptions to adjust those numbers in a positive way. So we're doing that now. We'll take that feedback, do some more analysis, and then as it stands now, we'll look at the moratorium in the springtime and reassess whether we need to continue or lift it. I suspect we'll be lifting it. If not then potentially sooner. Based on the analysis that's done between now and then, we'll redefine our actions and come up with some further steps, because even when we lift the moratorium, there's going to still be work to be done that we have to do. It's just we're at a point where we feel comfortable that we can still get back to kind of normal things, but still do this other work we need to do. That's all about the needs, and then beyond that, we take that information and go back into this bigger CWMP and look at some of the longer term actions, which would be, if we're going to discuss expansion of capacity at the plant or things, all those sorts of things, which will be analyzed, but those are down the road, and those are, the work to do that is over the next couple of years, and the work to implement any of those things could be decades. So this is a long-term plan that we're coming up with. So that's the next steps. And then this is the last slide, is these workshops. So I'll just kind of give an example of what we're talking about in these workshops. So if you take the category of residential single family, right now, if when we plan for a single family residence, or actually any residence, a bedroom is 110 gallons per day, which I know in this forum has been discussed often in the past. But we asked ourselves, well, what if that number isn't 110? So that 110 comes from, it's Title V, right? Yeah, Title V. So we asked ourselves, is that, really the appropriate number? And it may not be. And so if you were to change 110 to say 45, you can see the math there that the numbers come out a little differently, and there's some potential savings in terms of what we need. If we only need 45 per bedroom, then you save that difference between 45 and 110. And so that's an example of the discussion we're having with the rest of the town staff. And there's a variety of assumptions. Some are associated with residential properties, and some are associated with commercial properties. And do we do we need to use these numbers we've historically used, or can we adjust those, and by doing that, potentially impact, at the bottom of this chart, those numbers? So if you see that red arrow, it's pointing to the 1.58, which is, again, what we've permitted to people. But if we change that number to 45, then that number would go down, because we're not at 110 for every bedroom, it's now 45. And so those are the things we're discussing, and that's what's happening. So tomorrow we're talking about commercial properties. And once we wrap up these workshops, we'll be able to consolidate, adjust potentially this table, and then publish the next iteration of the table and see where that lands us in terms of getting us to closer to where we think we should be in terms of our numbers. So that is a summary. I guess open to discussion, questions.
Mark, you got any questions?
I got a few, yeah. Okay, so Chris, thanks for coming in. I did go to the select board presentation, but I couldn't ask questions then, and I appreciate you coming in and talking to us. I see that you did this this is just Westborough, right? But the sewer plant services Shrewsbury and Hopkinton, right?
Yes.
So have we done this same analysis for those towns?
No, and we won't, and we don't.
Okay, we don't need to?
They do their own. So these numbers here, 2.89 for Westborough, and then Shrewsbury has their 4.39. They have their own. So we're all part of one big permit, and we each have our own responsibility under that permit. And Shrewsbury and Hopkinton have their own requirements that they need to adhere to, and they need to stay under those numbers, and how they do that and what they do to do that is entirely up to them.
So there's no ramifications to the town if they over permit, or, because I just see Shrewsbury in particular permitting a lot of heavy sewer intensive uses that I'm concerned about. So as long as that doesn't have any negative impact on.
So the plant limit is 7.68, and if Shrewsbury were to decide to send 6 million to the plant, then everybody would be constrained, because we're not going to send more than 7.68 to the plant collectively. And if we did, then we would face whatever consequences from the DEP. So we're all responsible for our own stuff. The plant, as the governing body for the plant board, as the governing body for the plant, has the requirement to ensure that the plant stays at the number they're supposed to stay at. And so they monitor, obviously, all these flows. And actually recently, this past summer, all of us were in a meeting with them where they asked us about what we're doing to make sure our flows are complying with our limits. And our explanation was exactly what we're talking about tonight and the things we're doing. And they hold the other towns to those same requirements. So the plant board is the organization that is going to enforce the other towns to adhere to comply, just like we do.
Mark, can I just amplify a little bit?
Sure,
on
yeah.
that? Is there any negotiation done between
Hazel,
the
could you-
towns as to the amount of capacity that they have? I mean, in other words, if Shrewsbury came in suddenly and said they wanted another percentage point or so, do we, the other towns that use that sewer facility, have an option of, trying to change it or, get a justification or anything in that way?
And Joe will chime in if I say something incorrectly, but the answer generally is yes. There's certainly always could be discussion about adjusting the numbers on this table, but it's not necessarily an easy thing to do, and it would require, this is a permit with the DEP, so we can't just decide to do that. We have to discuss that and get that approved by the DEP, right? So and what the DEP looks to give you, to make their decision is this comprehensive wastewater management plan. So we have one on record from 2007, and Shrewsbury has their own. I don't know, anything about theirs, but they have one as well. And so if we didn't have this done, then like for us to go to DEP right now, we said, hey, we want to change the capacity of the treatment plant. I believe we would have to have updated CWMPs from each of the towns, and that would be our explanation or justification of the need. And so if we were to decide we were going to do what you suggested and kind of reallocate the flow, we would need that same documentation, bring that to the DEP, just have a discussion with them, and they would have to concur or agree, and then they would have to adjust our permit. So the point is it possible? Yes. Is it something that would happen quickly? No. It would take a significant amount of time for that to happen. So maybe that answer was more than you wanted.
Do you want to follow up on
Yeah,
anything?
if you don't mind. So, and sorry if I'm a little naive when it comes to this, but, so basically, it's a private entity. It's, even though this is in the town of Westborough, it's not owned by the town of Westborough?
Yeah, private is probably not the right, I mean, it's a public facility, but it's jointly operated by this board with representation from Shrewsbury and Westborough.
And I'm sure this obviously predates you, but why is Westborough's limit so much less than Shrewsbury's if it is in the town of Westborough?
So I don't know the specifics of how these numbers were agreed to. I suspect it's based on, and again, Joe, you might have a little history, but I suspect it's based on what was projected to be needed and what was presented as actual back then, and then there was some arrangement made, but.
When were these actually set?
Just so everybody knows who I am,
Yeah.
Joe Bacadoro, Assistant Town Engineer. So just to add to what Chris is saying, about 20 years ago, a planning study was completed for all of these communities and the wastewater treatment plant itself. And those planning studies looked at flow projections and so on and established those numbers that are on the slide right now. So that's how those numbers got established, and it was based on need. So they projected the amount of flow that would be needed for Westborough and came up with that number. Same for Shrewsbury, same for Hopkinton.
So we're looking 20 years back essentially
Yes, yeah.
on this at the moment. Is there any thought about trying to redo the numbers based on the changes in the community? I mean, I think 20 years ago, I don't think anybody had any idea of the population explosion in this particular part of the county, both commercial and residential. So I don't know, has there ever been any thought about readjusting these numbers so that they're a little more equitable?
So that's the process that we're in right now, and for the exact reason that you mentioned, that these studies have a shelf life, and they're about 20 years. So a few years ago, when that planning period was due to expire, that's when the comprehensive wastewater management planning process was reopened, specifically for Westborough. And we're looking at that flow number right now. That's the table that Chris put up there, and their projections of flow. So
So it's only open for Westborough. What about Shrewsbury?
it's open for all of the communities that feel the need to do it.
I'd be interested in knowing what Shrewsbury.
Mark? we
Well,
interrupted you.
yeah, so I think what, we're all wondering is, is it fairly allocated? Or is there excess allocation that's Shrewsbury's just getting all this benefit from, and we're at this constraint? And to my understanding, Hopkinton has barely used their allocation, but I could be wrong on that, so don't get mad. That's a good thing John's not here. But I'm just trying to figure out if there's a way for us to increase our allocation in addition to redoing some of the, the numbers that you referenced, which
Like bedrooms.
are like sticking your thumb in what's the old nursery rhyme where you're, basically just, it's a stopgap, but it's not a real solution in my eyes. I mean, it might be a 20-year solution, but we've got to worry about a 100-year solution. Or maybe maybe you're thinking it'll be more than 20 years. That's the answer I'm hoping for.
So there's a few things there. I guess first off, before we would go to the treatment plant board or the other towns and propose anything like that, we need to have our stuff done, and we don't yet. So that's kind of the answer. I think that's the first big obvious answer, is we need to first get our homework done. Part of the output of this bigger plan are recommendations on how to proceed, what we should do. And so those recommendations might include go back to the other towns and see if you can get some flow from them, right? I don't think that's a really feasible or likely avenue, but it's certainly a potential recommendation. I think, like, I don't really think that, I totally get kind of direction you're heading in terms of, you look at this table and you see, man, they got 4 million, we only have 2, but I'm very confident that there was a whole lot of work that went into how those numbers were determined. I mean, just off the top of my head, and I'm not defending Shrewsbury at all, but I think their population is double the size of Westborough. So, and that number right there is double the size of our flow. So those don't equate necessarily, but my point is I'm sure there was some rational reason for the way those numbers evolved. And we could always go back and look to adjust. But there's other things associated. So I'm just going to talk about Hopkinton for a second. Again, Joe will correct me, but why does Hopkinton send their stuff to Westborough? Well, my understanding is, again, back when these studies were done 20 years ago, when you send water to a treatment plant, at least ours, the permit is driving how much you're putting out of the plant. So that number is how much water we're dumping into the Assabet River. And the water is coming out of the ground somewhere, right? So we're pulling it out of the ground somewhere in the town, it's going through the system, eventually making its way to the treatment plant and then getting cleaned and then dumped in the river. That's essentially what happens. And Hopkinton has a couple of different basins, and so they draw water out of, and so the DEP, what they look at when they make these decisions is they want, on a much, much bigger scale than Westborough, or even like on regional and statewide scale, they monitor where we pull water out of the ground and send it to another basin, like I'm talking like big watersheds across like Concord River, like big riversheds. And so there's rules on taking water from one basin and sending it to another one. And I'm certainly no expert, so I'm not doing a very good job explaining it. But the point is Hopkinton was told, if you want to use this water, you have to send it here so that you can keep it in whatever basin it's coming out of. And so, I think it was more of we were told to do this versus, there was some big negotiation between the 3 towns to decide on this 0.4. So that's not anything we're going to solve right now, but I'm just highlighting that as just one of the examples of the complexity associated with these numbers.
So I don't expect to solve anything tonight, and I'm pretty confident we have it in good hands. I just want to get a clearer understanding of this so that when we have an applicant come in, I don't have to get you back in here to explain to everybody all over again why we're saying, no, you have to put a septic system in.
Yep.
You kind of led me to one of my questions, and I'm trying to get a handle on this. So that 7.68 capacity is based upon what we actually put in, or is it based on water meter readings for consumption by households?
Well, the 7.68 is based on measurements at the plant itself.
Okay.
So
That's-
it's not,
I'm just, because I know that I think Chris and I had talked at one point that the water meter readings, if we actually put sewer meters on every house, that we might have two different numbers, and that might give us a better idea of what we're actually processing for sewage. So, all right, so that was my only, I think my last question.
You have any?
I just wanted to ask one thing. You talked about the fact that you were looking maybe to recalculate the flow based on, for example, bedrooms, various things like that. Is that something you're pursuing? And how would you do something like that? I mean, is it a feasible thing to, recalculate essentially what the figures are that you're using for the wastewater?
Yes, it's very feasible and very likely we're going to make some adjustments. Whether it's specifically what we just showed on the slide, I'm not confident yet. That's part of the work that's happening like right now and including tomorrow with Jenny and many others from the town staff to make sure we're factoring in all of the other considerations that other departments may have related to this topic. And so I think there will be an adjustment. I know there will be an adjustment. What those specifically will be in terms of numbers, I don't know yet, but we probably will have them in the next, 30 to 60 days.
Can you just refresh my memory on how long you're kind of going to finish this study? I know the first slide did show some timing on stuff, but realistically, kind of what are we looking at to have some answers that, will make a practical adjustments or, different figures or whatever?
I think the timeline that this board and just about everybody else in the town is interested in is when will we say the moratorium is lifted and that anybody can come in and do some sort of development. I expect that to be the spring. If it's sooner, then obviously that's better, but we've communicated consistently that we think it's the springtime when we'll have that result. So basically we'll have, so what that means realistically is a table that identifies how much flow we have and how much we're allocating towards residential properties and how much we're allocating towards commercial properties. And under residential, it's how much we're allocating to multifamily and how much is to single family. So I think everybody here is aware that for I don't know how long, we haven't been doing much in terms of multifamily development. And one of those reasons was related to wastewater flow. But the outcome of this is that we're not having that discussion anymore. We have a amount of flow and we dedicate that to multifamily development and everybody knows what it is and we just kind of work it down until it's used.
Is there any situations, for example, that the planning board has approved a particular development and then that development has changed or hasn't gone through? Is there a way to reallocate that back to kind of the basic what's left? I mean, do you kind of keep an eye on that to see whether there's been a use change, for example, with the special permit or whether, they're not using the kind of flow they thought they were going to?
Yes. That's actually the discussion we're having right now, tomorrow, that we're going to be talking about is how, there's a couple of situations you just identified, right? It's one is we've already issued properties developed. We said they needed X amount of flow. They're not using all of that flow. So what does that mean? Can we get any of it back? That's a question. Another question is a property that we issued flow to. The developer came through this process through the planning board, and then they never did anything. And we've tied up that flow to a property, and in some cases, substantial amounts of flow. And so that's another question. Is there a way to potentially get some of that back? And we don't have those answers yet. In some cases, well, there's lots to those questions, but they're certainly worth asking. And really, I think what we should be doing moving forward, and I know we've started from our permitting perspective, is that I don't know how this works in terms of the planning world, but we issue your permit and there's a sunset on it, because otherwise, why do we spend a lot of time here, sometimes we hear how urgent it is to get this done, and then we get it done, and then don't see any outcome from that development. And so that has all kinds of other consequences, but it's a direct consequence to our sewer flow. If we commit that sewer flow to that project and it's never executed, then we've tied it up. And so it's something worth looking at.
John, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, just a couple more questions. When you're looking at the planning for future flow, I mean, I know we have a couple of zoning articles that we're going to discuss tonight that reduces some open space and create for more density. Are you taking that into consideration?
I'll say yes. We worked closely with Jenny and others. Can you just describe quickly about how we did the projections?
So we looked at different things for different flow categories. So for residential flow, we projected based on population increases. So that's in the single-family category and the multi-family category. For commercial and industrial, we looked at parcels that were either underdeveloped or not developed at all, and applied flow factors for each of those. So if there's zoning changes right now that are going to reduce the amount of undeveloped properties, put them in another category or something, then we might have to, in a couple of cases, look at some changes in how we've done some projections. But I might be wrong about this, but I don't think that those zoning changes would substantially change our projections.
And for some of the commercial and industrial side, I mean, everyone knows there's not a lot of sites left in town. So when you identified those sites, were you able to max out what the development would be, whether it's a distribution center or a manufacturing facility or R&D, biotech? Because all those have different flow amounts because of completely different uses.
So if there was an idea or a thought, and some of this goes back to the prior planning director, about how that parcel would be developed or that vacant land would be developed, we considered that, be it an office building, be it R&D, be it a warehouse. So that's factored into the analysis going forward. If there was no such prior information, knowledge, or projection available, then we applied a general flow factor per acre for that.
And then towns like Marlborough, they've obviously gone through this where they hit their capacity and had to build a whole nother facility. What could Westborough do to become self-sufficient? Is that even possible, where we don't have to, I don't want to say compete, but share a facility with Shrewsbury or Hopkinton?
It's possible. In current times, to permit, and what we're talking about is permitting a new wastewater treatment facility. And discharging to a surface water like the Azabet River is greatly discouraged, if not impossible, with the regulators right now. So they're promoting discharge to the ground, which would supplement the aquifers. Chris was talking about that deficit where you're drawing groundwater out on the drinking water side and discharging it to the sewer system, and it flows into a river and goes away. So if it goes back into the ground, then that builds back up the groundwater aquifers. So that's what they're promoting, and that's something that the town could pursue. Its own wastewater treatment plant discharging to the ground right here in town.
And I know this is kind of a crazy question, you probably don't have the answer, but what's the timeline for an approval for something like that, and what's the general cost? Like, what are the hoops to jump through to?
I'll take the cost question first, because you're right, that's very difficult to answer at this point. It would be, 20, 30, 40, tens of millions of dollars for sure. The timeline, these aren't things that happen quickly. There's a whole permitting process that you have to go through with DEP and a lot of site investigation work and on-the-ground sort of investigation work that needs to be done. So we're looking at, and then there's the time to actually build the facility. So, we're looking at, 5 to 10 years of a process between if we decided today we wanted to do it and actually discharging, it could be that sort of time frame.
And then, I know I'm keeping you a while, but Mark, this probably goes back, I don't know if you were on the board, but the EMC site, Dell.
Well, that was one of the things I've been raising my hand about, yeah, so.
Yeah, sorry, yeah, so that's
So the
kind of,
EMC site, obviously, I wasn't on the board then, but my understanding is that whenever that site is developed, there'll be private sewage treatment facility included that would serve both Southborough and Westborough sides. As a board, I think, if I'm still on the board when that's developed, should we be pushing for that treatment plant to not just service that site, but to potentially expand our town's capacity?
is that something that you guys have looked into?
So we're familiar with the EMC site, or the site that you're talking about. We're open to any ideas, and we have all kinds of ideas, but it just comes down to how likely and feasible some of these things are. There's a whole slew of questions associated with that specifically, because it's something that's already been agreed to, and so that means someone else has to agree to a change, and I don't know how likely that is. But it's a point that should be explored. I just don't know how likely it is. But related, I mean, there's flow tide up there, right? I mean, you've probably been to that area of town, and there's not much happening. But we agreed as part of that whole arrangement, however many years ago, to a certain amount of flow that's pretty substantial, that's sitting there and not being used. And so there might be an opportunity in the future to have discussions about how that can be maybe reallocated in some form or fashion.
Go ahead.
So this is less a question, well, it is a question, but it's kind of banging my drum about downtown. We've recently had the downtown development plan, we've had a housing production plan. Most of our lots downtown are not large enough for private sewage, but I think as a town, we recognize that redevelopment downtown might increase sewer needs down there. Once we get through this process, and I just want to remind everybody, can we put a mechanism in place to, I guess, reserve allocation for specific economic development zones or whatever we want to call them, so that we're not getting a project on a 20-acre, well, not many 20-acre sites, but on a 5-acre site that has the lot size to do private sewage, but they just don't want to do it, and they want to use public sewer. That would, I think, be better served downtown. So that was a long-winded question, but you understand, is there a way for us to set aside that allocation based upon our projected needs for downtown, and who would actually be responsible for that decision? Is it you, the select board? How do we?
So the answer is yes, that can be done. That's not something we're doing, like the Department of Public Works. We would rely on information from whether it's the board or other entities to give us that. Like, somebody's going to set the priorities for the town, would certainly be part of the conversation, and then we would be responsible for implementing it. So what we're going to say is we have this much available, You tell us how you want us to carve it up. We're going to carve it up into buckets, and we're going to monitor those buckets to make sure we don't drain them, prematurely.
Okay, so again, my understanding would be that the select board would have to make that decision. Is that something the planning board has the authority, or is that something we'd have to go to town meeting with? I mean, these are all hypotheticals. You don't have to get to. I'm just going to put my plug in. Let's set aside some sewer for downtown, all right?
I would say that that's something town council would definitely need to be in.
Well, I think it's probably the Board of Selectmen, but I would hope that any discussions about reallocation or discussions about the sewer, that the planning board would be more fully involved this time than they were with the discussion on the sewer moratorium. I mean, I think we as a planning board felt that this came as a surprise to us and that we were not consulted at all on it. So I'm just hoping that we can be more part of discussions as for allocation of sewer, because it obviously makes a big difference when we talk about various projects coming in, and also being able to encourage projects to come into town. So that's kind of my plug about being involved with decisions being made.
Yeah, I guess I have a different view. I think that it was well known across the town staff, and while we didn't directly come to the planning board, because I'll certainly come and discuss, participate, do whatever, but what we proposed was an update. The moratorium is a regulation update, and the select board is the approver of regulations, sewer regulations. And so that's why we went to the select board, for them to approve it. Your point is well taken, and so we want to be, we want everybody to have their opportunity to voice
I think
input.
being a little more transparent about it is what we're looking for at this particular time. And I think that will help, because I know that, there are an awful lot of complaints in town about the sewer moratorium because people felt they really didn't know about it.
Yeah,
So
I mean, I guess I'll also say, though, I do hear people make comments that, maybe they're just kind of conversational, but that development is off track or something because of this. And I don't know of any instance, I'm sure there are some, but I don't know of any instance where we've had to turn down something. Now, there might be people that aren't bringing things forward because of it, but I guess I just don't think it's entirely based on wastewater that people are making decisions.
You're absolutely right. So,
Yeah.
I'm just making my plug for.
Just in
more
defense of Chris,
transparency
Hazel?
on this. I'm delighted to say that John Gelsich has now joined us. And we're just talking to Chris about the sewers. He's given us a presentation.
Just in defense of Chris, I was calling it a moratorium like 6 months before they even voted on it. So I think, maybe when I was chair, didn't communicate it well enough to the rest of the board, or, we had a lot going on with the transition to Gen A too.
I do think that the comments I've had from people in town was the fact that this came as a great surprise. So I think that, when you're making a decision like this, which really affects the entire community, that perhaps there should have been, and hopefully there will now be, more transparency in any of these discussions. So that was all.
But I will just say, transparency doesn't necessarily mean, like, the decision rests with one body.
What I mean is more information
Yep.
out to the community before decisions are made on that. Christina, do you have any questions of Chris?
I do not. Thank you.
John, have you?
I don't know what was asked, so I'm not going to ask
know.
questions right now and,
Okay.
ask the same question, so. Thank you.
All right. I don't think there's anybody here in the audience who would like to ask a question of Chris. If you'd like to, if you just come up and introduce.
I'm not a member of the public, so I don't know if that matters.
Well, it's not a public hearing. We don't need to.
No, we're just, it's an information hearing, so feel free, but you'll need to come up. Yeah, if you just, it would need to introduce yourself.
Just go right there.
You can, yeah.
You can do it right there. Yeah.
Jacob Murray, Waterfield Design Group. We're the engineer for a project that's coming before the board right now, and hopefully we get approval today. We're building a 3,000-gallon septic system on an existing apartment building, existing hotel that's being converted to an apartment building. There's already sewer there, but because of Title V, the flow is going to increase. Whether that does or not, we don't know, but according to Title V, it will. I guess I'm wondering if there's how and when you can definitively know when the moratorium will end. I just asked that for the sake of our owner, who would definitely prefer not to put in a 3,000-gallon septic system when they already have a sewer connection there that could be utilized. Yeah. I don't know if that's, yeah.
So I don't have a definitive date,
Okay,
but we're projecting the spring,
Right.
and that's not even, you can interpret what spring is, but I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
next March, April,
Okay.
which is in line with the moratorium was imposed with a year expectation. And so we're not just going to hang on to it and wait a year, but if we can do something sooner, we will. But that was kind of our aim point, is to be next March, April, May, to have some answers.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to ask on behalf of the owner, because
No,
I don't think anybody really wants the 3,000-gallon septic system to go in if it doesn't need to, obviously, and particularly if it goes in and they use it for a year and then they connect to the sewer. So, no, thank you.
All right. If there are no more questions, I'll thank Chris for coming tonight, and thank you also. This was very informative, for me at least, and I'm sure for the rest of the board and for the public who may be watching this.
Great, thank you very much.
All right, based on this, since John has been able to come, I think we will do the public meetings and hearings at this point and then leave the zoning till the end. All right, so 165 Flanders Road, I'll take first because I believe we have a request to continue that until October 1st, based on the fact that some of the peer review needs to be done by, who need,
And the engineering department is
engineering hasn't
reviewing the
finished it,
peer
yeah,
review.
yeah. Are there any questions on that? Could I have a motion to continue the hearing?
I move that the planning board continue the hearing for 165 Flanders Road until the October 15th, 2024 hearing date.
Second.
October 15 or October 1st? I have October 1st of what you gave me.
Kristen said 15.
October 15th.
It's the 15th,
Yeah.
okay,
Sorry about that.
thank you. There is a second?
Yeah.
All in favor? Thank you. All right. 25 Connector Road.
Do you want me to pull up the plans?
Yeah, I mean, as well. Anything to introduce it or? Okay.
Just introduce yourself.
Okay,
and then-
Jacob Murray, Waterfield Design Group. We're the civil engineer and the site engineer for the project. Also remotely is Tyler Phelps from the owner and applicant. This is just to remind you, this is a hotel at 25 Connector Road, 7 buildings on 12 acres. 6 is our hotel units, and then 1 is a community building. The plan is to convert them to residential apartments. This will require, obviously, a number of internal building work, which will be permitted through the building department. And then as part of that, there was an increase of parking spaces that were needed. that we've added, which has created both the need for additional drainage, and then as part of that, as I mentioned in the previous presentation, is because of the sewer moratorium, even though there's already sewer access there, the change in use to full-time residential apartments, according to Title V, is an increase of flow, and so the increase of flow can't go to sewer, so there's also a septic that's been reviewed and approved by the Board of Health, and as well. So, and then the final thing about this is, I know from our previous conversation, there's been discussion about a number of these units being low income and affordable housing, and that's been worked out with the planning board as well, the planning department and board as well. Since the last time we were here, we had a round of review with the peer review engineer. I'll just highlight the big ones. The biggest one was actually probably from the fire department. They asked for a number of additional signs and striping for fire lanes, and for access aisles for hydrants. And then there were the addition of future EV-ready spots that were also identified in the plan. And then with the peer review, there was just a lot of clarification of mostly drainage items, nothing that really significantly changed in the plan, other than I think we increased the size of some pipes 3 inches or so here and there. But we were able to work through those with the peer review. And then finally, those to the additional bike rack detail, and I think those are really all the big changes. The general layout of the site has really stayed the same. So,
Okay, Jenny, do you want to just give us a little update on the housing?
Yes, I can. So the applicant has been working with the Affordable Housing Trust to be able to increase the affordability percentage from 20%, which is the current requirement in the bylaw, to 25%, which would allow for all of the units to count on our subsidized housing inventory. So if it was at 20%, then only that many units, I don't have the math in my head right now, only that many units would count on our inventory. But because we're getting up to that 25%, all 109 units will count for our subsidized housing inventory. So that's pretty significant. In exchange, the Affordable Housing Trust is offering a subsidy to help offset that additional cost of the developer. So that is an agreement that was distributed to the board, I think maybe a couple days ago.
Yeah.
And it's referenced in the decision under the recommended conditions.
And I think the other major thing was that there'd been some discussion about possibly putting a sidewalk in, and that does not really seem terribly feasible, but there is a monetary amount which the applicant has agreed to contribute.
Yes. So in talking with the applicant and then, of course, the DPW and other town staff on what we could see this financial contribution going towards, it was decided that the best thing for it to go towards was for the redesign of the intersection at Flanders Road and East Main Street. It is on the tip currently to redesign or redevelop that intersection. I don't know the details because it needs to be designed first. The town has to cover the cost of the design to be able to be up on the tip project list. So that's the recommendation from DPW and other staff.
Is there any, out of curiosity myself, is there any, I know that we as a town have to design that intersection before we can get the state to work on it. Do we have any figures on what the cost of that design is going to be?
I don't, but we already have some funding going towards it, and I know that they have an engineering firm that they plan to work with, so I think that this will be the final amount that we'll need to cover that cost. That's what it sounded like from my conversation with the DPW.
All right. No, yeah, I was going to say,
question
if
about
anybody has a question.
Follow-up question on that.
Okay. go
So is this intersection improvement like 100% going forward?
Yes, it's on the tip.
Okay. Because I guess my concern is if we have a similar situation like we did on Otis Street where, not the same, but like we say, there's going to be a grant, we don't need your money, but then we don't get the grant. Like if this project doesn't, if this intersection improvement doesn't go through, will these $40,000 just kind of sit in an account that can't be used? Do we put something else into that condition to say, or, you know, how it is, and then if after 5 years, that intersection project has not been undertaken, these funds shall be used for pedestrian connectivity that will serve the residents of this development or something, to make it general. Is
I
that
think
reasonable,
that
or do you
would-
think it's not worthwhile because it's going to definitely go forward?
I think that's reasonable. I think it is going to go forward. It's part of the East Main Street project that's on the tip. I don't know all the details of that, but the tip project is a little bit different from the Otis Street project, where that was funded through Mass Works and Mass Dot and Complete Streets. So those were all real grant funds. This is, it's on the tip. It might not happen until, a few years from now. So I would just say that we should be careful about the timeline if you do establish one, like maybe 10 years.
I mean, John, I think that's a good idea, actually, because I think that, the way things go, this wouldn't affect you.
Yeah.
It's really, we're talking about mechanics, essentially, as much as anything else. But I do know that there was a problem with the original funds that were put in from, what's the name of the development across from the post office? Which I never could-
Highlands
Right, the original monies that were coming from the Highlands.
has just been sitting there for a long time because it was too specifically targeted towards that
Exactly.
intersection.
And some of it actually, I
You know,
think, has
I-
been used for other things.
I agree with that in the sense that, if we're careful enough about how it's worded and how it's written, that we say that this contribution is used in the East Main Flanders Connector Road vicinity or something general like that, that would give us some leeway to say, okay, well, 3 years down the road, we're ready to do the B-Walt there, for example, and we need a crossing on Connector Road or a crossing on Flanders or a crossing on East Main, and we haven't made any progress on that intersection. Well, maybe we could use some of the money for that. I mean, I think if we can word it so that it's a little more general than just we have to use it on that
I mean, it could be just
specific
for the
intersection.
East Main Street Development Project. I think that is not just that intersection, but there's some other things connected with that. So maybe just confine it.
The concern I would have with that is we need to tie it to the project. And I think that's what Jenny did in the condition, because it says
Right.
the residents will use it. So I think if we just have any kind of condition on the condition, it's got to be for the use of the residents of this project to access. So if it's East Main, like if it's down by Bellows Road, that might not
No, I don't
impact
think
them.
it's, yeah.
Right, but I'm saying if we make it
Yeah, I see what
general-
you're saying,
Well, that's
yeah.
what I'm saying, in the vicinity of the East Main, Flanders, and Connector Road
Yeah, I think,
intersections.
and this
Something like that.
is probably just semantics, but I think we just need to have something in there that says for the benefit of the
Okay.
residents of this
No,
development.
I agree with you, because it has to be connected or it's not going to work.
Again, I don't think that affects you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sorry, it just, it's questions.
Something you have to work
I'll
out.
still take your money.
But yeah, I understand. Well, I think from the applicant's standpoint, it would also be good that that $40,000 does get used for something that will benefit these residents down the line and give value to the property,
Exactly.
as opposed to going to something that's 6 miles away on the other side of town.
Right.
So,
And that was the whole point,
Yes.
is that, any monetary contribution needs to be tied to whatever project that it's going to benefit.
yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely.
Can I wasn't here last meeting. I did watch the last meeting and did a Mullen waiver, but I did have some questions on the presentation, if that's
Yep, go ahead.
allowed. Okay. I didn't see, and again, I'm not an expert on reading these, but where is snow storage?
It's currently, since it's already active, it's in the south right side of the plan, at the edge of those parking places next to the shed, and that's because that's the furthest away from the wetland area. We don't want to, you naturally want to shove it towards, oh, absolutely, thank you.
So is that shown on one of the plans, though? It's not, or it's not marked?
I believe it's on the site prep and demo or the landscape
yeah.
lighting material one, but yes, this is where it is.
And that's a pretty steep slope.
Yeah.
Downhill, away from the
It's
plant?
uphill.
It's uphill, I can't read those.
Yeah, it's fine. It's going uphill. So this is like
Okay, so there's
410.
there's no risk of runoff?
Yes, yeah, this, like over here, it's nice and flat, it'd be great, but this is exactly where the wetlands are, so you don't want to be doing.
No, I'm sure Conservation asked these questions already, but I just want to double check for my benefit.
Yep.
Sorry, I'm just trying to recall my questions from the, regarding your comments earlier and questions for the DPW director, can I ask how much that 3,000-gallon septic tank is costing?
It's going to be, I've priced it, it's going to be approximately $400,000 to $500,000
Okay,
to install that septic tank.
okay.
It's not, just to clarify, because septic tank is a tank, it's a leaching field along with a number of septic tanks.
right.
No, and I understand that it's not a minimal cost, but I would say that coming back and asking to connect to sewer would require reopening the permit or delaying the permit until the moratorium, and it just seems like an inconvenience, and you would have to pay additional sewer connection fees, which unfortunately the DPW is not here to tell you how much those are, but they're not insignificant. So I just would encourage you to try and keep plowing forward rather than.
Wait on them? Okay.
Let me just interrupt for a second. There's someone on Zoom here, and I don't think,
Oh, yeah. Could you just identify who's up for the.
Tyler, do you want to identify yourself?
Yeah,
or-
sorry about that. Yes, Tyler Phelps, I'm with PEG Companies. I represent the applicant. I'm the developer.
Kristen, did you get that? Okay, sorry.
I would say from a long, obviously Tyler and the PEG company would have to weigh the pros and cons of the price and also developing, but from a maintenance standpoint, for the long term.
Understood.
Of the septic, it would be a lot nicer to go right to the sewer.
No, and believe me, I think a lot of people feel that way. I completely understand that. I just don't want you to get the idea to put the brakes on or something, because that would, anyway.
Right,
the
that's
point
not
is-
our intent. It would be interesting to revisit the sizing of the septic, given the presentation provided earlier by the DPW. We are sizing it to that 110 gallons per bedroom versus the 45 gallons per bedroom that they're considering for the study that they're pursuing.
Yeah, just to clarify that was just a hypothetical. That's not
Right.
anywhere set in stone. It could end up at 90. It could end up at, a
Sure.
number we haven't even, or it could stay at 110, unfortunately. So let's keep our
Right.
fingers crossed that it does go down to 45. The other question I had, I know you're asking for a waiver on the parking, but you also talked about putting in a dog park, and I'm just wondering, would that infringe upon the open space? And maybe Jenny's the person to.
It shouldn't, I mean, an open space definition, if it's grass.
Okay, and
Wouldn't
Concom would
infringe.
be okay with a dog park, and, because I'm just trying to figure out if you're constrained on space for parking, but you have space to put a dog park.
I think it would
feels
just depend on what the location and the proximity to the wetlands. It
Okay.
would be hard to say.
And again, I'm not that concerned, because I think the 137 will be sufficient, given the size of the units.
Yeah, if they decide to do a dog park, they should just come in and talk to me first, and we can figure out if it needs to come back.
I'm sure it's not going to be the size of what the town's doing. If you ever gone up to like the one at Avalon, it's like a little
No,
strip.
no, I know, it's
Yeah.
going to be a small little dog park. I'm fine with that. I think those were my big questions. If you want to move forward with that.
John, do you have any questions?
No, not this time.
Actually, you cannot vote on this,
Correct,
but
yes.
we're always happy to have questions anyway.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right, if there are no more questions, and Jenny, you have nothing further to add? No. Okay. Could I have a motion? First, I need to call a motion to close the public hearing.
Do you want to ask for public comment?
Is there any comment from the public on this matter? Hearing no comments, could I have a motion to close the public hearing?
Can I just ask, should we have Jenny summarize it, or we're just going to count on?
After we close it, I
I'm
can,
just gonna-
After we
I
close
was
the
gonna
public
close
hearing?
the-
Okay, very
I was
good.
gonna-
I'll make a motion to close the public hearing on 25 Connector.
Second.
Any questions? All in favor? Now, Jenny, if you could summarize the motion.
yes. And I'll
Special
just
permit
add,
for us and just run through it.
yep. I know there's quite a few conditions. I will say on the septic question that before you get a building permit, it's one of the conditions in here that the applicant will come in for a pre-construction meeting and talk to us. And so maybe there'll be more information at that time from the engineering department. So we have our general conditions here, as you can see in the draft. The project includes 85 one-bedroom and 24 two-bedroom units for a total of 109 units. 5% of the units, or 6 total, will be fully handicap accessible units. This special permit will expire in 3 years if it's not utilized. And then the applicant's responsible for filing any other permits that may be needed. Prior to construction, the applicant shall provide a complete construction schedule, and a pre-construction meeting will be held with town staff. All the shop drawings of all materials shall be submitted to the DPW for review and approved prior to construction. The applicant shall comply with the requests as stated in the memorandum from the engineering department, and will apply for a trench permit, and a fee of $20 will be submitted prior to the construction beginning. During construction, this decision should be kept in a highly visible location. Unobstructed road access with a width of no less than 20 feet shall be provided. Any work in the right-of-way is subject to the DPW rules and regulations. Must perform a daily cleanup of construction debris and provide appropriate erosion controls. Let's see, hours of construction are limited to 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday through Friday, and 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. on Saturday. This is consistent with the bylaw.
Can I just interrupt for one section? How, are you essentially ending all leases from people that are in there now and they'll have to move out while you're doing construction? Or is it just purely curiosity on my part, is how you're dealing with the existing tenants?
That'll be a Tyler question.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are no tenants to the extent that there's lease agreements in place, because this is operating as a hotel. Operations will completely cease, is the intent, as a hotel. And so all guests that are on nightly rental agreements essentially will be asked to leave or vacate.
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
And then
Yeah.
oh, no, that's the extent of it. Intent is to shut down, complete the construction for the conversion, the renovations, and then open up to lease once the construction is complete.
Thank you. Very good.
For affordable housing, the development shall have an affordability requirement of 25%, which totals 28 affordable designated units, which shall be distributed throughout the development. And the developer will be responsible for preparing any documentation required by EOHLC and the town to qualify the units for listing on the SHI. The Affordable Housing Trust has entered into an agreement with the applicant to provide a subsidy of $360,000 as detailed in the correspondence that's available on the application. And the subsidy shall be paid upon the issuance of the certificate of occupancy for the covered affordable units. If the project is completed in phases, the subsidy shall be paid in parts based on the percentage of affordable units receiving COs in each phase. Let's see. The affordability will be at or below the 80% AMI level and will be in perpetuity. At least one of the SHI units must be fully handicap accessible. And the marketing plan shall include a preference for current residents of Westborough, employees of the town of Westborough, and employees of businesses located within Westborough, with a particular preference to those who are veterans. The development includes 134 parking spaces, which is a,
Can I ask you, I thought it was 137. Did that get changed, or?
I don't think so. Is it 137?
I know it's 134. The fire department took out some of the existing spaces
Oh, okay,
that they wanted striped for fire lanes.
that's right.
Okay.
The
that
recent
answers that
site
question.
plan reflects the 134. Instead of the required 164 spaces. In addition to the parking spaces, the applicant shall also provide a bike rack for bicycle parking, and 20 of the spaces will be made EV charging station ready, with at least one of them designated as an accessible space. The stormwater management plan must be reviewed by the DPW. The applicant shall make modifications to the site plan where necessary as directed by the DPW. Submit all stormwater permit requirements. All locked gates will require the installation of a rapid access key box. All fire hydrants will be painted red. The outdoor lighting must comply with the town bylaw. And this condition on the pedestrian connectivity, I'm going to throw in an additional sentence per the discussion. So in lieu of the construction of a sidewalk on the property, the applicant shall make a contribution in the amount of $40,000 towards the redesign of the intersection of Flanders Road and East Main Street, which will be used by the residents of the development to access downtown Westborough and numerous shopping amenities. If the project does not happen within 10 years, the money shall be reallocated at the discretion of the planning board.
Can we just, could we just rephrase it to say, in lieu of sidewalk improvements on Connector Road, the 40,000 shall be used for improvements in the vicinity of East Main, Flanders, and Connector Road that will benefit the residents of 25 Connector? Something general like that. Is that too general, or?
No, I think that's fine. I mean, we could even say something more general of like, if the funds have not been expended within 10 years of the permit issuance date, they shall be used for any pedestrian improvements serving the residents of this development.
Yeah, but the other thing is that I think there is language in here, or should be that the permit expires in 3 years if it's not begun. So why are we waiting 10 years? I mean.
To expend the funds. We're assuming the permit's going to be effective. They're going to build the
Right, but
residential
if
units.
but if they don't start within 3 years, then they have to come back and reapply.
No, he's talking about when they pay us the 40,000, the town has to spend it within 10 years on East Main Street,
All right,
Flanders.
so in other words, if they decide not to go forward, they forfeit the $40,000.
I don't think it doesn't really
See what I'm
impact
saying?
them. It's more of if the project, not if this project doesn't go forward. If the East Main Flanders project doesn't go forward. If the funds are not
Oh, is
expended
that
on
the way
that
you're looking
project.
at it? Okay, that's not the way I
Yeah,
was
if the
looking
funds
at
are not expended on the East Main Flanders project, then they would get spent on a
Got it.
pedestrian improvement
I was
serving this
looking at it
community.
differently.
Also. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I think we're overthinking this because there's
Yeah.
no, the town will certainly find a way to spend that money long before 10 years is up.
Yeah.
I think if we just make the comment, the provision general enough so that
needs
it can
to
be used for improvements in
It needs to
that
be used-
vicinity, we don't have to
east
say it
side of town
specifically
is what we're
towards
saying,
East
and
Main
not- yeah.
Flanders.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I think that's what the original condition says. And I'm saying if it doesn't get expended on that project within 10 years, putting that time limit on,
Right.
then we can reallocate them to a different use,
Okay, that's
a
fine.
different pedestrian
That's fine,
use,
however,
serving
yeah.
development.
Okay.
So keep how it is, but add the sentence, if funds have not been expended within 10 years of the issuance date, the funds will be expended on a pedestrian project in the vicinity of the development.
I would say if the funds have not been expended towards however we're naming that project, towards that project, the board may opt to, or may reallocate the funding to a pedestrian improvement
That would benefit.
that would benefit the residents. I wouldn't say in the vicinity of this, because I would say we want to make a benefit to the
Okay.
those residents.
Okay,
Right.
so
That
the
makes
planning board will,
Yeah.
Can reallocate the funding to
Okay.
a different expenditure.
I like that.
Okay.
do you have that, Kristen? Okay, thank you. My notes are all over the place. Okay, great. Landscaping and snow storage, the applicant is not proposing any new landscaping, but if they do propose any, they would just need to give notice to the planning director to determine whether the landscaping will require review by the planning board. The applicant will be responsible for any of the plantings that are existing. Adequate snow storage will be provided. The project proposal may be subject to a MassDOT permit, and most likely it will, I believe. But if that is the case, then you'll need a permit from MassDOT.
You're just saying if the entrance gets modified on their land?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
14 days before a request for a C of O, the applicant shall contact the planning office to schedule a site visit, and all plans shall be approved by the planning board through an as-built prior to the first C of O.
Do you have any comments on the changes that were made?
We were good with them.
Okay.
So, I don't know if Mark has a question.
Are there any questions, Mark?
Yeah, do we, it's my understanding there were 3 waivers with this. Do we need to list those in the decision?
There was actually just one parking waiver.
Parking's the only
The other waivers had been modified. It actually was not needed because of
Oh, right,
the...
okay, yep.
Yeah,
Yep, that's
but I
fine.
included it in the conditions.
Okay,
It was the parking section.
I think you just noted the section
Yes,
under that, under number 35.
right. I think that's adequate.
right. I think I was expecting to see 3 waivers, so that
Oh, okay.
that makes more sense to me now. Okay.
Okay.
Do we need to make any findings?
No, I have I have what has happened during the meeting in the minutes, so I can draft those and distribute them to the board.
Any other questions about the decision? Could I have a motion?
In accordance with MGL Chapter 48, Section 9 and Section 3.1 and 6.2 of the Westborough zoning bylaw, I move that the planning board grant the special permit for 25 Connector Road as presented with the conditions as read aloud before.
Is there a second?
Second.
Ready to vote? Okay. All in favor? Thank you very much. Good
Thank you.
luck on your project.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Hey, thank you all very much.
Thank you. All right, Jenny, I'll turn this over to you for the zoning amendments. Did,
You'll have to read the legal notice, so
what?
you'll have to read the legal notice.
Oh,
Sorry.
I don't think I have it, unless it's over here. Yes, sorry, found it.
Hazel gave me her packet.
All right. The legal notice is as follows. In accordance with the provisions of MGL Chapter 48, Section 5 of the Westborough Planning Board will hold a public hearing on Tuesday, September 17th at 6:30 regarding the 2 proposed zoning amendments entitled Highway Business Zoning District Development and Inclusionary Zoning. The following articles will appear on the warrant for the October 21st, 2024 Westborough Fall Town Meeting. 1, to see if the town will vote to amend the Westborough zoning bylaws to replace in its entirety the existing section 6.2 of the Westborough zoning bylaw with entitled multifamily housing in highway business district and a new bylaw entitled highway business zoning district development. The purposes of this bylaw is to allow additional flexibility for development in the highway business district in exchange for providing public benefit amenities and/or a sustainable design while maintaining an appropriate mix and scale of development. 2,
Hazel, I would recommend just opening one at a time, just for the purpose of the planning board report at town meeting.
okay,
You can hold the second one until I make the second
Okay.
presentation. I don't know if you're voting tonight, but that would just be my recommendation.
I thought tonight was really just an information session that we'd vote next time.
No, this is this is listed as the public hearing as required.
Okay.
Yeah.
So should I continue reading the public notice?
You can read just the last sentence at the
All
bottom.
right, the public hearing will be held in the Great Hall of the Forbes Municipal Building, 45 West Main Street, Westborough, Mass. Please see the calendar on the Town of Westborough homepage, posted 48 hours prior to the public meeting for additional information. To access the proposal and any submitted documents, please go to our website at https://www.westborough.ma.gov/1313/town/meeting/zoning/articles. Documents are also available for review in the Westborough Planning Office, Board Office at 45 West Main Street, Westborough, Mass. during regular business hours. Persons unable to attend may submit comments in writing to the Westborough Planning Board in advance of the public hearing or attend the public hearing as indicated above. This was published in the Community Advocate on August 30th and September 6th of this year. I thought we were going to think of a way of shortening this public notice down.
The second one, yes, we do need to do that. The second one, you can just read the paragraph when we get to it.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
All right, Jenny, you're on.
Okay. So I know you had seen a presentation before, and this is similar, but I did make some changes. But this is for Article 17 on the town meeting warrant, and this is to replace the existing section 6.2 of the bylaw with a new bylaw entitled Highway Business District Development. I know the planning board is familiar with where it is, but for the public, the Highway Business District runs along Route 9, starting at the town line for Northborough and ends at approximately the intersection of Connector Road and Route 9. So you can see it highlighted there in orange. Currently in that zoning district, these are the uses that are allowed either by right or by special permit, which will not be changing as a result of this bylaw. That will still remain the same. And then the table of dimensional controls on the right shows the minimum lot area, frontage, setbacks, things like that. But what I'm really going to be focusing on is the minimum open space requirement, which is 60% for that zoning district. So for the open space, if you compare us to our dashboard communities, which are communities that are similar to us in size, finances, things like that, I looked at their similar zoning districts, so commercial districts that were located near a highway. And I found that Westborough is at 60%, while majority of other towns are either do not have a requirement, that no minimum, or they're between 20 and 40%. So in comparison, Westborough is quite high, which leads us to not being able to compete very well with other towns in terms of lot coverage. So compared to the current bylaw, This is, just describes what this new bylaw will do. Under the current bylaw, it is only for development of multifamily in the highway business zoning district. So under section 6.2, which the previous applicant was applying for a multifamily under, they can apply for a special permit for the multifamily use, and the planning board has the discretion to modify the dimensional parking and sign requirements. So that's currently in our bylaw, but it is only for multifamily. The new bylaw will allow this type of flexibility for all types of developments through a special permit from the planning board. So no matter what use, if it's allowed by special permit, if it's allowed by right, if they would like to seek a waiver to the dimensional parking, signage, or an open space reduction, they would need to go to the planning board. It also adds things like height and setback flexibility to accommodate sustainable features. It adds additional parking requirements to accommodate bike parking. Route 9 runs adjacent to our planned B-Wall Trail, so it's really important that for new developments, we add in bike parking. And then one of the biggest things that I'll talk about is it adds an option for an open space reduction in exchange for other public benefits. So again, right now, the planning board could reduce the open space requirement, but it's only for multifamily. This revised bylaw would allow that flexibility in exchange for a public benefit amenity. So this open space reduction would be done through a special permit through the planning board in exchange for a few different choices. The developer could donate undeveloped land to the town, they could implement sustainable design in the development, or they could contribute a fee, or they could choose from all three and do a combination. If the item in the sustainable design is not listed, the planning board can also determine an equivalent value, which I'll go into more detail. So we came up with a calculation method for how the exchange will be calculated. Projects can earn up to 12 points, and the open space requirement cannot be reduced below 30% of the total lot size. So there is a minimum there. The development can choose multiple items to achieve the points, and the planning board will establish regulations for this point system and the eligible options. So if this passes town meeting in November, we'll look at a public hearing to go over the regulations for this. So working with Sustainable Westborough, we came up with sustainable design options that a developer could come up with or choose from the lists that would be in the regulations on what to trade off points for. And I think you all know the benefits of sustainable design options. They reduce energy consumption through renewable sources. They lower the carbon footprint. Integrating water-saving fixtures and rainwater systems can reduce water waste. And in our climate action plan, it actually describes a lot of these things as well. So it checks a lot of boxes. The sustainable design features also, or sustainable developments tend to also have higher property values due to their lower utility costs. So that can also boost the overall property tax base. These are some examples of the sustainable design options that a developer can opt to do in exchange for points to get the to get the open space reduction. The planning board will also have the discretion to review any proposed sustainable design features that are not included. So just taking one for an example here, the LEED certification. The points for the LEED certification are based on the type of certification. So 12 points would be for LEED Platinum certification, 8 points would be for LEED Gold, 4 for LEED Silver. And one more example, the HERS rating, they would get the full 12 points if they can achieve a rating that is 10% lower than the threshold specified by the Energy Code. The developer can also opt to donate land to the town in exchange for open space reduction, and the number of points is based on the square footage of the reduction in the open space requirement. The land would need to be transferred to the town of Westborough or a nonprofit organization that's focused on conserving open spaces, such as the Land Trust. The developer can also opt to contribute to a green revenue account, which would be used to fund projects related to environmental conservation. But if they do choose that option, it would be a maximum of 8 points. And with all of these options, we would really rather see the sustainable design rather than a fee or a contribution of land. So these are further described in the proposed planning board regulations, which I believe you should have a copy of. Those are not finalized. Those would be visited through a planning board public hearing in November if this passes town meeting. But those give you an idea of what we are looking at. And then my last slide, why do we need to allow for zoning flexibility? I think the planning board sees this need in a lot of projects. But the current open space requirements in the highway business zoning district specifically have not really yielded the desired results or the benefits of open space. We see a lot of car dealerships, we see a lot of office parks, and they make up the open space requirement through grass medians and islands in their parking lot. So we're really not seeing that beneficial open space. Also, the current requirements can lock an applicant into a specific design instead of allowing for a creative design with multiple uses. So that flexibility to negotiate the zoning rules can really result in a win-win scenario for the town and the developer. And then lastly, it is a recommendation in the master plan to highlight Route 9 as a business-friendly environment, promote sustainability and new developments, and it's also described in the climate action plan. Thank you.
Are there any questions by any member of the board on this?
I have a question.
Sure.
So are we saying going from 60 to 30 and then there's points for additional leverage, or is it, is that correct?
To go from 60 to 30, they would need to trade off
Get the
something.
points. Okay,
Yeah.
so it's still 30 as the new
minimum.
minimum. Okay,
Right.
thank you.
Done?
Jenny, who were the developers you spoke with that helped with the point system or review some of the sustainability?
Oh, you're going to make me list them. There were many I reached out to. So we did reach out to all of the developments along Route 9 in the highway business zoning district. I was able to gather emails from our permitting system and reach out to them. So I did hear back from a few of them. Cold Harbor, I heard from. RK Centers, I heard from. I'm trying to remember the other ones. There were quite a few. I can send you the comments. I do have a collection of them.
So I guess I love the idea. I guess my only concern is that the cost for the developers to actually build these developments to I don't know if you can pull it back up.
For the sustainable design?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. I mean, as it is right now, the design costs and construction costs have, obviously, everyone knows they've increased, right? And to go above and beyond in doing this I don't think it does a whole lot for the developer. So my guess is a lot of them will choose to, pay that amount to increase their density, which I think the biggest issue is not really sustainability, but it's the fact that we're kind of, we're losing to other communities because we have 60% open space, which is just, it shouldn't be. It should be much less than that. So I know you can't change it now, but I think it would be great for developers to just be able to do that without having to do all these point systems or.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. The feedback I did get was that they were open to do many of these things, and I think that the trade-off that they see also is the tax benefits.
I was going to say there must be tax benefits.
Our sustainability coordinator also, he works with developers that come in on the different programs they can apply for. So they do receive some tax benefits to implementing some of these items.
And then on here, I know we did, because when I first joined, I asked, I think it was the Samuels project, I asked about being LEED certified. And Mark, you said pretty much they don't need to do that because it's just writing a check to get the certification, right?
Yeah, the way that zoning was written, and that's not highway business, I think it's industrial.
That's just IE or ID.
Yeah, that might be
Yeah,
IE.
I forget
yeah.
the acronym,
So
but they had to build to a certain standard, but they were able to save the money on the actual certification, which, is
Sort of a nothing.
again, I'm not clear on that LEED certification.
You just get a
We can
stamp on your
ask Ben
building.
about it, but, it's I think it was like a $250,000 savings or something, depending on the scope of the project, so.
So I guess I would just ask, and now that I'm seeing this, I know you've sent this around, but is there a way we can change that so doesn't have to be LEED certified, but same thing, like they don't have to cut the check?
So, John, I think we're talking about
Doesn't say it has to be.
two different issues, and I'm sorry, can I?
Yeah.
If we want to move the open space requirement to make it easier for people, developers, well, that's just a separate zoning article. This is a little bit different in that it's a trade-off kind of incentivizing kind of thing. I mean, I feel like what you're asking is a fundamental change in the zoning to say, we're going to change it from 60% to,
30%.
30% or whatever. And that's a fundamental change that we could have a conversation about, present an article, and, the town would have to support that. I don't know that what we're doing here is really.
I mean, go ahead.
You've got some of these things. So first of all, this is going to be in the regulations. So this is even in the zoning. So we can talk about during the hearing. And I'm sure there's other options we can add to that to get easier points for developers, right? But just looking at some of them, solar panels, 2 to 6 points. If you do the least, you get 2 points. And then air source heat pumps, the least you do, you get 4 points. So right there, for two things that a lot of companies are probably going to be doing in the next 10, 15 years, you've already got 6 points of the total of 12 that you could get.
Right, so that's 15%, right?
Right, so and then EV charging stations, I forget what you said, is it 2 per charging station, or is it just 2 if you have them on your site?
I believe,
And we can figure this all out
yeah,
in
I
the
don't have it
hearing,
in
but,
front of me, but I believe
say they get EV charging stations, now they're at 8
it's
points.
per the charging stations. It's not like for the whole site you get 2
So,
points.
yeah, they do,
Okay,
so
so
they do 3
there's-
charging stations, they got their 12 points right there.
You can get to it. Yeah, I was just looking at, I know, Mark, we're kind of talking two different things, but I just saw the LEED certification, and that was probably one of those ones that no one's going to do.
We talked about that
Yeah, we did.
previously, because we
Yeah.
talked about just being LEED certifiable, but why did we
Right, and
decide to
there
make
were
it
two
LEED
separate things.
certification?
One was certification, the other was certifiable.
Like if a building was LEED
Separate.
certifiable, meaning it met all the requirements, but they
Right.
didn't actually have to get
Yeah.
certified, but we decided not to for some reason. I don't
Well,
remember
but
why.
don't forget, you just made the point. These aren't going to be in the zoning. These points are going to be in our regulations.
Which
So
can
we
be
can talk
changed.
about your question about, well, should it be LEED certifiable or LEED certification? We're going to have that whole conversation about how those points are given out in
So it's
another
at
meeting.
our discretion.
Yes, and
Okay.
it's in there, it's in the bylaw that the planning board does have the discretion to modify any of these. If it depends on the development and what's going on with it. But you may say that, okay, you can't get that total LEED certification, so maybe we'll get you 8 points instead of 12, and you can do something else to offset that.
Okay.
Well, and then the other thing, the donation of open space, right? Like, how do we make sure that that open space that they're giving to town is actually decent open space?
Well,
Like,
because you have a right to accept it or not. I mean, there is,
is that written into the zoning or is that written into the regulations?
that'll be, I assume would be a regulation.
It's a special permit, so it's at the discretion of the planning board to decide whether it's acceptable open space. That was actually a comment from the finance committee last night. So it would be in the zoning, it is in the zoning that the planning board has the discretion to accept or not accept. And it's a special permit, so it's a discretionary permit in itself. You can say no.
Yeah, and then my last question, maybe. I know we talked about the Green Reserve Fund as a destination for the donation, but could we also say Green Reserve Fund and/or Open Space Fund? I mean, is that an unrealistic request? As the chair of the Open Space Committee, I feel like, we've got $15,000 in there right now, so I would love to see.
Is that the fund that can go buy land?
Yeah.
Okay, I disagree with that then. Sorry, Mark. I don't think it should go to open space then.
Okay, well, then we're going to have a fundamental disagreement on that.
Yeah, why would you not want funds that are donated to offset open space to go to acquisition of open space?
Yeah, I don't need to open up a whole can of worms. I just don't agree with that.
I'd like to know why. If we're going to talk about it and you're going to vote against something like that, then I'd like to know what your reasons are so I can be informed.
I think personally that the town has too much open space right now, and we don't need any more. It needs to be developed. Land needs to be developed to help right now where the taxes are.
Right,
In the budget, we need more revenue on taxes, and this is where we don't
So
get any of
John,
that.
I'm going to disagree with you on this, right? Because I think we've acquired 2 to 250 acres, maybe even more, in the last 5 to 8 years, and it's all been residentially zoned. And I have a fundamental difference with the idea of those 250, 300 acres being developed into additional housing with, the strain on the schools and I think people would prefer to have green space in their backyards and connective trails through forest than they would another subdivision.
So I would disagree for a different reason. We should be, in my opinion, we should be focusing development where development already is and building more dense development where there's already development and preserving the open space that's natural, because you're not going to get that natural open space back. And I don't disagree that we need more development and more investment in the community, but that needs to happen where in our downtown, in our highway business districts where there already is development, and not using this green space that we really can't get back once it's developed as that canvas for development.
And I'm going to pile on one more reason. There's an ecological benefit to open space that, again, we can't get back when we start tearing down, cutting down trees and paving streets and so on.
So if we're putting this for the highway business and it's meant to be for commercial, then the funds that are from this shouldn't go towards, single-family residential developments then.
I don't think that's where it's going. It's just, I think Mark's point was that most of the open space we've acquired was in residential zoned areas.
Not just, essentially, it is used by the residents, but it's not, and most of it, because it's being used as open space, is not going to be on Route 9. It's going to be out somewhere where people can actually use the open space. And most of that open space is in what is now zoned residential and not zoned commercial.
Yeah, so I'll just say that how the bylaw is currently written and in discussions with the Sustainable Westborough and in our group, the fund that was created we named it the Green Revenue Account, and it would be at the discretion of the select board to create regulations around how that can be used. Our recommendation when we created the bylaw was that those funds be used towards sustainable projects or projects that encourage sustainability. It could also mean pedestrian connectivity. We haven't, hammered out all the details, but that would be up to the select board. It could also be to purchase open space, but we wanted to have that flexibility so that when someone went to the select board and wanted to request to spend these funds, it wasn't just for one item. It could be used to put solar panels on one of our town buildings or to purchase open space if there's a property in mind.
And it can go to anything that the town wants, like for maybe municipal buildings?
So our recommendation was to make sure that it was centered around sustainability. So as long as it was improvements that had to do with sustainability, I would say yes.
Okay.
The fund hasn't been established yet, right?
No, it has
And the
not.
parameters around what the fund can be spent on hasn't been established. So that's all going to be established. And they're going to define what sustainability measures are, and they're going to define the different things. So I don't think Jenny can really say what it's going to be used for, what it could be used for. It's just,
Right, it's
what
just,
they
in the
establish.
bylaw, it does describe just a sentence, I don't have it in front of me, but that it can be used towards sustainability. You'd have to look at the bylaw, I don't have it up, but we wanted to leave it open. And Mass General Law in January, the legislature passed the ability for a select board to have an account like that and have the ability to create regulations and spend out of that account without going through town meeting. But the account has to have very specific guidelines, such as the ones we're suggesting.
Okay.
All right. We don't have to really approve these, do we? We just have to, what do we have to do with them? Don't we just
make a
recommend?
recommendation
To
to
make
town
a
meeting.
recommendation to pass this at town meeting.
Yeah.
You don't have to do it tonight, we can move it to the next meeting if you want.
Are we waiting on anything until the next meeting?
No, I don't, I mean, I see no reason not to
No,
do
we
it
can vote.
tonight. So it's just, essentially, this is a public hearing, though, is it not?
Yep, so-
So therefore, any comments from the public? Not seeing any comments, could I have a motion to recommend passage?
Sorry, one quick question. Am
Oh,
I
sorry.
able to participate in this one?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you.
Recommend, I'm trying
I
to.
recommend town meeting pass this article.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Okay, that's one.
Now you need to decide who will get up and read the
I think
recommendation.
Chris said she wanted to do it.
Yeah, you get to read that whole article.
No, you don't.
And answer all the questions.
No one's reading the whole article.
We can make a decision. We have time between now and the town
Yes.
meeting to make a decision.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
wait on that. All right, you need.
What do you mean no one's reading the whole article? Everybody at town meeting will have read the whole article.
We're at the end, so everyone will be asleep.
Right. Okay. This is the legal notice for to see if the town will vote to amend the Westborough zoning bylaws to replace in its entirety the existing section 6.1 of the Westborough zoning bylaw entitled multifamily dwellings with a new bylaw entitled inclusionary zoning bylaw. The purposes of this bylaw is to encourage development of new housing that is affordable to low and moderate income households by consolidating the affordable housing requirements throughout the existing law. In addition, this bylaw will substitute all previous references to the bylaw to affordable housing. I think a lot of this is housekeeping, actually, because things were in so many different places in the zoning bylaw.
Yes, it is. There are a couple of changes, but for the most part, it's just consolidating it into one bylaw. So this is Article 16 to replace Section 6.1 with inclusionary zoning. I know you all know this, but for the public, inclusionary zoning means that a portion of housing units in a new development are reserved for affordable housing. She read just that paragraph. She didn't have to read the rest.
That I could get away with reading one paragraph.
No,
Didn't
good,
read the
thank
whole
you.
thing again.
So, for example, the last development that came in front of the planning board, they designated 25% to be affordable housing, with the rest at a market rate cost. So who qualifies for affordable housing? I'll talk a little bit about the HUD income limits on the next slide. And I know you all are familiar with the term AMI, or area median income. So low-income household is defined as a percentage of the AMI. And I actually did some research into town staff salaries, teacher salaries, our firefighters, police officers, and many of our administrative staff. And most of them would qualify for up to 80% AMI or the 110% AMI, which I'll show on the next screen. So I think that's a really significant point to make. So these are the HUD income limits for Worcester County. So the median family income is $147,400. And it's broken down here. I included 50% AMI, 80% AMI, 110% AMI, and then 120% AMI. And I'll explain why I included those. So in Westborough, the median household income is $133,145. So that is not reflected on here specifically because these are for Worcester County, and that's what we have to go by. But you can see here that a family of four, they would need to make not more than $97,800 to qualify for an affordable unit that was up to 80% of the AMI. Why do we need inclusionary zoning? We all know that 40B requires all cities and towns to have that 10% of total housing stock designated as affordable. If you don't have the 10%, then you're subject to comprehensive permit filings, also known as 40Bs. In Westborough, we are thankful and fortunate that we are above our 10%. We're at just shy of 12%, with 975 total subsidized housing units. I will also note there, I put a little asterisk. I know you can't see the footnote. I need to figure out why that's not on there. That does not mean that those are all affordable units. Those include some market rate units. For example, 25 Connector Road, all of 109 will be on the SHI, but they are not all affordable. There are market rate units.
Can we interrupt, Jenny?
Yep.
Does it make, and I'm going to kind of generally ask the board and you this, does it make sense to find out how many actual affordable units we have and put that number up there?
We do have that number. Ed Bain with the Affordable Housing Trust has been keeping track of that. So I don't have it in front of me, but I can ask him for it.
Do we think that would be helpful? Because people see 975 units, and they're like, oh, we have plenty, but then if it's really 250 units.
Yeah, I think any figures are much more interesting to people. I mean, in other words, the tables before this, I think any figures that can show the affordability and where we are. I mean, you know, you say we have X number, but are they affordable? So I think it's very important if we can get any of those figures in front of the public. I think that's what we should be doing.
But don't some of those units expire at some points?
There are some, and we're working with them to get them to be in perpetuity.
I don't know if we want to share the numbers, because I think it just opens up for way more questions than what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, but at the same time, we do have two new projects that are coming in that have a lot of units. So
I think I know what you're saying, John, but that won't affect what is the current, like, actual big A affordable by HUD numbers. It's just showing that, you know, this is the percentage we require for a development, but we do get credit for a lot more that are just regular market rate.
I also think,
affordable is actually lower.
I also think a lot of the intent of this is just to kind of clean up the disjointed way we have the inclusionary language in the actual zoning. We have inclusionary language in residential, I mean, every zone where you can have
Yeah,
residential.
well, that was the whole point, was to
Right.
kind of clean up
So I
zoning,
don't,
right?
I don't,
yeah.
I mean, I don't disagree with John that, you know, when people see 975 on the SHI, well, why do we need more than that? I mean, we've only got, you know, I think 10,000 residential units in town, maybe more. I'm not sure, but, you know, that seems like a big percentage, but actually, it's probably less than 10,000.
I was gonna say, it can't be 10,000.
I can't do the
That'd
math.
be
I can't do the math. Come on.
9.75%.
I just was on an 8-hour flight or a 6-hour flight, so
Yeah.
give me a break, guys, all right?
Why don't I continue, and then we'll understand a little bit more about the
Yeah, go ahead.
affordability part that's changing. Okay. So again, this consolidates all the affordability requirements into one bylaw. So the open space subdivision, the transit-oriented village, all of those will just reference this bylaw. So it will be consistent. There'll be no question on which bylaw requires what affordability and what minimum units size. It also adds a 10-unit minimum threshold to trigger the affordability. I think it came in front of the board, but we have run into projects that have come in where they're lower than 10 units, and it's not financially feasible for the developer to put in an affordable unit, so they can't do the project. We don't have a minimum in our bylaw right now, except for in one section where it's 5. When we did our economic feasibility analysis, it found that 10 was kind of that sweet point where a developer, it was financially feasible for them to put in that affordable unit and still make a profit and be able to do the project, which of course we want to see.
Can I just, I'm sorry, can I ask a question about that point only? So I know you're adding in this 10-unit minimum, and I think the type of developer that's going to build a 10-unit complex or whatever it might be, it's your traditional local developer. It's not your institutional capital. I think that group that looks to build a 20-unit is still that local developer. I think as much as it's great to have affordable housing, I do think that's a strain on them, even though that, say there's that measurement of that sweet spot. I think that's more for institutional capital that can afford to do it. So as we look to do, I'm sorry, I'm like having this great candy. So it's a little, so excuse me, but I think as we look to develop downtown, and right now, the majority of developers that come downtown are going to be local developers. And I think the affordable, if we have it as a 10-unit, maybe if we were able to shift it to 20 units, it would help. You know, as a minimum 20 units instead of a 10-unit. It just would help local smaller developers do these projects. And those are the groups that are going to help with the downtown redevelopment, so.
Someone had that same comment at the finance committee last night. I don't know the financial impact between 10 and 20. I just know that based on the economic feasibility analysis, the type of construction, the number of stories, it had found that 10 was the recommended number.
Yeah, I think it's less to do with, it's all about the financials, but it's the type of developer. You know, you're not going to have, Avalon's not going to come in and build 10 or 20 units, right? They're going to only look for 200 units, but name any local developer, they'll do that, and that will, you know, they can only buy X amount of materials for this cost. They can't spread it out over a bunch of projects. So yeah, I think it will make a difference, so.
So if you have a developer that comes down, a small-time developer that comes downtown and wants to put something, they could do 9 units if they can't afford an affordable unit at 10, or if there's the potential for doing 11 or 12 units to make up for that affordable unit, I think that opportunity is there as well. I don't know how many are going to come in with exactly 10 units because they're going to be like, it's financially infeasible for me, even though it might prove out, but then they can do 9 units or 8 units. Or if they say, well, if I do 2 more market rate units, I can offset that affordable, and then they can do 12 units.
You see, I'm looking at the downtown. I mean, if you look at the downtown and think about what we're talking about, I mean, how many places are available to build 10 or more units? I mean, more often than not, we're looking at places where people are going to, you know, maybe do 2 or 3 units. They're going to be smaller units, I think, at this particular time. The larger units, if the larger developers, it's not going to be a hardship. I mean, if you're going to put 40 units in, that's a different thing.
Right.
But I do feel personally that I think, you know, an affordability component for over 10 is not unreasonable.
I guess I just don't feel that having it at 10 is unreasonable, because if it's really that much of a financial strain, they just build 9 units or 8 units.
And if they got the option.
Right.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you put it at 20, then we're getting 19 unit developments that aren't going to have any affordable, and then you get enough 19, 18 unit developments, and then your ratio is thrown off.
But you're going to get at least one out of that.
Not if we're at 20%.
Well,
No,
let
but
me,
if one for 10.
No, I'm saying if we move it to 20,
I was saying
threshold of 20, then you wouldn't get
Which I
any.
think is too much, yeah, personally.
so there's a few other things in here that kind of help offset that 10 number that might help. So I'll just finish
Yeah.
going through those, and then we can go back to looking at that number with all the other things in consideration too.
All right, can I just make a comment, though, that we are moving it from 5 to 10? Like, currently, the only threshold we have is 5 or more. We had a select board member, I think it was Alan, recommend 8. I mean, we could bandy about, you know, is 5, 8, 10, 20, 40? I mean, I'm sure there's people out there who would like it to be really high, but, you know, I think 10's a nice number where 20%, you can do the math very easily, and a small developer can look at that and say 10 means 2. So, you know, again,
Yeah, I'm just thinking, I mean, what I do for a living, right? I just know to have the most success, you bump up that minimum, but I understand.
right, and we're
You're
also,
thinking there.
we've got a very active affordable housing trust that's helping developers, and we've seen that, right? So, you know, I think we have to trust the whole process to work, not just, I mean, we have to pick a number.
Yeah, no, I get
Right.
that.
And it's a reasonable number. I mean, when you think about it, we were at 5, which I always felt was very unreasonable. So, you know, we've doubled that number at this point. We can always change it again. It's written in stone. And I think sometimes you have to try things out and see what the result is, and some things don't always work.
Yeah, and we are looking at changing some zoning for downtown as a recommendation of the downtown development plan. Now, personally, when you talk about 2 or 3, like, I think density is our friend, and, you know, we should be looking at a big number per acre, because it will end up with smaller units.
Let's let Jenny finish the.
and
go
more
ahead, Jenny,
economically
finish your
feasible.
Presentation.
So what this also does is it changes the level of affordability to capture additional income levels. So as a result of the downtown plan and the housing production plan, looking at our demographics and the actual housing need, the incomes in Westborough, we found that we're really missing out on the 50% AMI level and the above 100% AMI. So really the 110%, 120% AMI. Which was that workforce housing income level that I had on, I think, slide 2 or 3. So this will have a range of the affordability or the income levels, which I'll show on the next slide. Another thing that it changes is it puts in the bylaw the local preference for current residents, employees of businesses in town, town of Westborough employees, and veterans. I know we already do that in our planning board decisions, but this puts it in the bylaw. And then it also adds a requirement that 25% of the affordable units be ADA compliant, so they must be accessible units. So this describes in more detail the affordability requirements. We've been working with a lot of developers recently with the Affordable Housing Trust, and so we've learned a lot about what developers can and can't afford based on the percentage that we're asking of them, and based on the AMI, because the AMI, the higher the AMI, the more rent or sale they can have for the house. So we broke it down into 2 tiers. For rental projects, 15% would need to be between 50 and 80% AMI. So it would need to be an average between that of 65%. And then for tier 2, 5% of them would need to be 110% AMI. So that's our workforce housing. And we found that that is a little more affordable for developers also. But in addition, it meets the need in Westborough for that workforce housing. You may not qualify for the 80%, you might be a little above that, but you can't afford a market rate unit in Westborough. So that kind of meets the in-between.
Jenny, I'd like you to throw in here actual figures. I mean, I think, you know, when the public looks at this, when you're, you know, somebody says it's 50% of the AMI, well, somebody says, well, what's that? I mean, it may have been shown on an earlier slide, but that doesn't help people. And so
Yeah, I can do that.
if anywhere we have that kind of thing, if you throw in the amount in some way so that people have an idea of what we're talking about.
Yes, definitely. So for the public, I'll show just taking a 4-person household.
Yeah, that's fine.
Well,
50
I actually think you should go lower.
Yeah, I was going to say,
Do the 2-person household or the
Okay.
1-person.
So for a 2-person household, 50% AMI, they could not make more than $55,000 per year.
yeah, and I think that's the kind of figure that people want.
I think a 4-person household is, you know, one thing, but I think most people look at themselves, most 4-person households look at themselves as 2 incomes, right? They're not 4 incomes from that household.
Well,
And
that's
so,
like 4, meaning 2 adults and 2 kids.
2 kids.
It's a
That's 4
family
person.
unit.
no, I get that that's the income level, right? But most people are saying, well, you know, I mean, to be honest, these numbers are kind of backwards, right? Like if you're a 4-person household with 2 kids and you've only got 2 incomes, your threshold's 68. But I mean, I feel like
That's
you need affordable housing more if you're a 4-person household than if you're a 2-person household,
yeah.
right?
I mean, you could say you're a 2-person household with a single parent.
Well, that's true too, right? But you know, again, I think numbers.
I just would like some figures.
I think the 1 or 2-person numbers would be better because most of us say, okay, you know, in my case, my wife and I make this much a year, and I couldn't imagine living off of $78,000 in this town.
Well, take a look at our housing production plan. A lot of people do.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yes, but okay.
But I do get your point, and yeah, I can definitely explain that.
Okay.
As part of it. So you can see here the numbers for the 2-person, and when I'm talking about 110%, you know, that's the 129,800 split between 2 people or a single parent with 1 child. So I can add
I think
that.
that's essentially what people are going to be most interested in out of all this is what these figures mean.
I'm really just trying to agree with you, Hazel. I'm not trying to belabor the point.
Jenny, would you like to give a presentation on just affordable housing in general before this?
Oh, I definitely could. I have before. I should just get the recording and play it.
All right.
So the developer can also contribute a fee in lieu of on-site units, which we really would not like to see because the cost to actually develop a unit, it's not feasible for us because we don't know when we're going to actually use those funds to build a unit. So if they want to do this, it must be through a special permit from the planning board, and there are specific findings that the planning board has to make. There has to be an unusual net benefit to achieve the town's housing objectives. by allowing a payment instead of constructing them. The findings must include the current balance of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, the town's current SHI. If we found that, we really need the units built because we're getting close to that 10%, we're not going to accept a payment. And then the planning board will decide where to designate the funds, either the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, the Senior Disabled Tax Relief Fund, whatever. And then we did put a payment amount, which is consistent with many other towns, because I think that was always a tough negotiation point with the developer. So it's twice the HUD income limit for a family of 4 at 80% AMI. So going back to that chart, that was $97,800 for a family of 4 at 80% AMI. So if you multiply that by 2, it's $195,600 for one unit.
Are we actually spelling that number out in the zoning, or we're just are we leaving
It will
the?
just be twice the HUD income limit, and the reason that a lot of towns did that is because it fluctuates.
Changes
Every
every
year,
year,
it changes and goes
No,
up
I get
every
that,
year.
yeah, I'd rather do that.
Is that, so, and maybe I'm confusing how it works, but what if someone wants to build like a bunch of one-bedroom units?
Build, what do you mean?
Like if you're,
Yeah, they'd still have to do the 2 times.
so even though it's
Yeah.
for a family of 4 and you can.
Yeah, no, the number, the formula would stay the same no matter what they want to build.
Yeah, it's more consistent with the cost of it is to build a unit. I mean, that's still low, $195,000 for one unit. It costs more than that to construct it. But the family of 4 is just really the average.
Okay.
Yep, it's not
I
4
mean,
bedrooms.
we want them to build the units, and if they want to build the 1-bedroom units and actually do the affordable units even better, we don't want them to build a bunch of 1-bedrooms and then pay the $200 to opt out of some.
No, I was just curious because it's based upon a four-person family, and you're not going to have a four-person
No, I get
family. Yeah,
the
you know,
question,
I just, yeah.
Right in the 300, I mean, the new Marriott one sort of thing with 300 square feet, you're not going to have a
No.
4-person family. living
Yeah,
in
it's
there.
just an average.
I mean, if I could, I'd make it based on the 4-person actual income and see, make them pay that, right? But we can't structure it that way.
It's unhappy. You're right.
So I think you all know why this change is needed, really consistency in the bylaw, but after doing the economic feasibility analysis, the master plan, the community needs assessment, which called for more accessible and affordable housing options, and then, of course, the recent housing production plan, we really found that we need to encourage more mixed income housing developments to reflect the current need in Westborough.
Yeah, the housing production plan was really the best presentation. It's too bad we can't combine that because that was really
It was,
informative. That was a
yeah.
great presentation.
Yeah. We're not going to make any friends if we try and do that
No.
at town meeting.
Definitely not.
So the other thing I need to talk about is the Affordable Housing Trust had some comments and recommended
Yeah, I saw
revisions, which I'll pull up. And I have no issue with any of them, but I think it's up to the board to determine if you want to make those changes now before the warrant closes.
The question on that, it was where the funds go. I think we really have to think carefully about, we've got these various funds and, funds in lieu of to be paid into X, Y, or Z. Now, we really need to think about where this money's going to go. There are all these options that have laid out as to this goes into the Greens Fund, this goes into the X Fund, this goes into this. And sometimes I think we're losing sight of the big picture on what we ought to be looking at as, how we can best use these funds in a practical way and not have something sitting in a fund that's, going to be sitting there 20 years from now. So that's my concern a little bit about throwing things into these various funds. And I noticed that, housing is always looking for money, and I understand that. But is that the appropriate place that the payoff on these should go? I'm just throwing this out.
I mean, Affordable Housing Trust Fund Board has used the Affordable Housing Trust funds to create
Right.
more affordable housing, so, and they haven't been super shy about spending it, so.
I think they just want to limit it in the sense that they don't want us to put it into the general fund.
Right, that I understand.
But I do
because
think we
don't-
should.
I don't want money in the
You
general
know,
fund.
they actually suggest senior, support funds, not just the Affordable Housing Trust, but their suggestions are the Senior Disabled Tax Relief Fund, which I think is an admirable inclusion, the Westborough Youth and Family Services for housing-related case management,
Right,
or a regional housing service office. I would actually argue maybe even the school department, because housing in general creates additional needs
so,
for schools.
so the question is, I mean, those are all very admirable, and that's fine, and I would very much like to see a wider range of the use in order to do those things, but what fund does that go into? I mean, that's what I'm saying.
Well, I think they want us to specify the funds a
Those would
little
all
more
be
than.
individual funds.
That's what that's what I'm trying to figure out. I just,
They're all separate established funds.
You could word it so that it was an account related to affordable housing or something like that, or housing.
yeah, I just guess I'd like it a little broader maybe so that I understand all the different things, but, I just,
Well, there's a fine line between broad and too
Right,
broad, right?
exactly.
And I think that's their
Something.
point, is that they don't want to see these donations at all, but if somebody is going to make a donation, they don't want to see it just going
into the general fund.
Yeah,
So what
or,
would-
or the open space fund.
Right.
Sorry, Mark. So the general fund, what would be, is that?
That's the town fund to spend.
We spend on anything.
And
That's where
why?
your taxes
And so I'm just curious, like, why would that not be a good idea?
Well, because they think that if we're going to reduce the amount of affordable housing, that
You want it to go towards
You want that
something.
money.
Well, yeah, the other thing is you should have a connection between where the funds are coming from and where they're going.
well, I agree with that too, right? Like,
Yeah, so if if you're in a situation where you're getting funds because of, somebody's not going to build the affordable unit, you don't want it going to the Parks Department. I don't know. But what I'm saying is you want to make sure that there's a nexus between the two things.
yeah, I mean, if you let it go into the general fund, you're basically telling a developer, well, we'll let you build it if you pay 5 years' taxes ahead of time, or, right? Like, that's not really what
yeah.
that money is intended to represent.
Yeah, I look at it sometimes as a way that if the town needs to do a project, and instead of coming to town meeting and, raising taxes to do whatever, they can dip into the general fund, or I don't know if that's even possible, but they could take some of this money and apply it to that. Like, for example, the new community center and the build-out cost, that's going to be,
Astronomical.
it's insane. And I know I've mentioned this many of times, and I said it when it was presented to us, but I feel like these are ways that if it's something the town wants, great, but this is a nice way to kind of put money towards something the town wants.
Yeah, but I think there's an argument to be made that you don't even let a developer do a monetary donation to reduce that percentage,
Well,
right?
yeah, I
Like-
know, but
like, we've always had it,
You need to be
20% or no, right? Like, I guess that's not true. We've negotiated lower percentages, but.
Right.
But this actually sets a formula where that negotiation creates a certainty for a developer as to what that amount's going to be, that we didn't see in other projects where we got, in some projects we got a lot of money, and some projects it was like getting blood from a stone.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
I'm curious, when you think about kind of the collective of these like funds going from one place to another, and we talked about it earlier, right? Would it impact something like a community center, or are the pockets much smaller so that it wouldn't
So that's what we're saying, though, on this, right? Like, if somebody's going to make a donation in order to reduce their obligation
Yeah.
for affordable units, that money needs to go to a fund that actually promotes affordable housing in some way. And it's hard to say that, I mean, you could make a very, very loose indirect correlation that if we took money from that to pay for the community center, well, that would lower everybody's taxes and everybody's,
Sure.
therefore would be more affordable, but it doesn't really,
Not the spirit of
affordable.
like, of
No, it's
take-
not. I
yes.
mean, the
Oh,
whole
right.
point, obviously, is that, if you're taking money from developers for a particular reason, then that money should be spent in a similar way
Yes.
to benefit the community.
Yes, no, that makes sense. I was just asking to John's
Sure,
question, like,
yeah.
is that a pool that even,
It's all very confusing.
well, so it's not a pool.
I'd like it to exist that way,
Sure.
but that's my own personal.
I mean, there's a lot of funds out here that that the town already has, and I think I just named a bunch of them that promote affordability that I think we could name, but I don't think the general fund's necessarily the appropriate destination for this.
So Jenny, can I throw a wrench in the whole process?
Sure.
Do we strip some of these things out of the bylaw and also establish regulations to have a formula for the payment in lieu, the fund where that payment in lieu would go, so that all we have to do is have a planning board hearing to change it rather than go and change the zoning bylaw again?
You can, yes.
Is that too much work before town meeting?
No, I mean, now's the time to do it. I can
I
modify the
would
wording
certainly
to be
promote
similar.
regulations versus change in the zoning, because the regulations you can change at will, and you do not have to go to a town meeting to get changes in them. So I think any and all, I think it should be a general policy, actually, in any zoning change that we're making, to look and see what can be put into regulations versus what needs to be put actually in the zoning code.
So you're saying the formula for the payment calculation and what else?
Kind of like all of the payment
All the
details. Like it could require a payment in lieu, but the details of how much that is, what funds it would go to, what it could be used for, all that could go into the regulations. Because I'm just thinking with the payment in lieu, we're changing ours, or proposing to change ours, but we've heard Norfolk has theirs where they take the median sales price of a house over the last 12 calendar months, and then what the affordable cost is, take that from the median price, and then that is the payment. So it could be like $700,000.
Yeah, I saw that.
And it just makes it that much more,
Yeah, it was so complicated.
it just makes it that much more less palatable for a developer to do the payment in lieu than to
Right.
build a unit, and then they build the units.
God, yes, yeah.
I can
So having that
revise that
flexibility might be
and
beneficial.
bring it back to the next hearing.
Yeah,
We
that's a
should-
good idea. So why don't we leave this bylaw open?
Can I get feedback, though, on the other items from the Affordable Housing Trust, so I know if I need to make other changes? One of the things that they wanted to change was modify that Tier 2 from 110% to 120% AMI.
Well,
That
then
would
that could
capture
go
a
in the
little bit.
regulations, wouldn't it then? If you change,
No, that would not, that would still need to be in the zoning.
that's supposed to be in the zoning.
That makes sense. What was the rationale for the 110 versus 120?
It would align with the federal and state programs that use 120% AMI as the upper limit for
But I
the
guess what was the
workforce
reason we
housing.
went with 110 versus 120?
It was in the housing production plan as that tier of 50% to 110%. So I don't see any issue with changing it. I think we would still meet that. It's up to 120%. So you could be at 110%
Right,
and
as
still
long as it's the
qualify.
up to. That's the important language.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, also, the trust is creating a down payment assistance program for which eligibility can be up to 120% AMI. So there's that one that I would like feedback on. And then the next one was increasing the average AMI requirement from 65 to 70%. They thought that the 65% would result in it being a little financially unfeasible for a developer. And they thought it would be more fair to move it up to 70% based on recent feedback. I don't have an issue with that. I think that's fair. because it still captures that lower and the higher incomes. And then, oh, the funds, we talked about that. And then they asked that there's a provision in there about right of first refusal. And they
Oh,
wanted.
yeah, I saw that,
Yeah, they wanted it changed to right of refusal, just
Right
to
of
make it more
refusal,
consistent with deed riders and things. So if you have no issue with any of those things, I will make those changes as
Yeah,
part
I
of
just wonder how many of these could go into the rules and regulations too.
Well, that was my question, yeah, on this, but I think not all of them.
the funds,
like,
yes. The funds can, the formula can.
The 110 to 120 AMI.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't mind it being in the zoning. I just think some of those things can.
I don't think I can move that out of the zoning.
I don't know if that needs to change.
I'd
the
leave that,
zoning.
I mean, obviously, right of first refusal is a grammatical change, taking
No,
out
that-
one word, that's not a big,
But that, I think that, I mean, I don't know what, that right of first refusal, is that a one-time or is that?
Yes. That's how it was explained to us, right? If it's right of first refusal, the state comes to the town and says, would you like to purchase this unit? And if the town says no, then they go to the marketing lottery system.
you cannot
And then the town would have to basically compete with the market. But if they ask the town says no, then they go to the lottery system. For some reason, it doesn't sell. The town can then, after that, say, okay, we'll buy it now.
Okay.
So it gives town more flexibility to get those units.
But I also think that we have to be, like, we're using a lot of language and thresholds that are coming from the EOHLC, and like, what if the state decides to raise it to 130 AMI to get on the SHA? Or, you know what I
This
mean?
would
Like,
still apply, though.
no,
that
but
point-
then we have to do a bylaw change.
Yeah, but I think at that
Whereas
point,
if we-
that's a reasonable bylaw change. That's not gonna be something that's gonna be just,
Or if we put it in the rules and regulations, I mean, again, I'm not suggesting rewriting this whole thing, I'm not asking you to do that, I'm just, counterpoint. If we can put it in the rules and regulations, to Hazel's point, let's try and do it that way, so that if the language that the state uses or the definitions change, we don't have to go back to town for, I mean, I feel like we have so many bylaw changes on every town meeting that it would be good to take care of those in just a public hearing if we can.
Yeah, but a lot of this is legal language that has to be in a zoning bylaw.
required, but.
I can definitely inquire about the AMI, but my guess is that it cannot be in a
I'm not
regulation.
suggesting we send something
get
to
what you're
town
saying,
meeting
yeah.
that isn't going to get through
Yeah,
AG,
it's just,
through
yeah,
the
we're
Attorney
just trying to
General.
make it easier, but it, also there's certain rules and regulations, I think, as far as, how things have to be put forth based on,
Okay.
particularly how these new laws have been written.
Okay,
All
so
right,
you want to
then we'll-
continue this until the
Yeah,
October
we'll just-
1st meeting?
yeah. Could I have a motion to continue the
I'll make a motion to continue the public hearing on the inclusionary zoning bylaw to October 1st at 6:30.
Second.
any discussion? All in favor? Thank you, Jen.
Yeah.
Jenny, do you have any other things to bring us up to date on?
I do, I have a few things. First, the open space and recreation plan, there's a public outreach meeting on Thursday at 6:30 in this room, the Forbes building in the Great Hall. And then I sent out an email to you all, but we finished the portion of Section 5 for the B-wall along West Park Drive. It looks really good. So we're going to have a ribbon cutting celebration on September 25th at 5 p.m. So I hope you all can make it. There'll be a little reception afterwards, and that light at West Park Drive in Flanders will be open, I believe, September 20th. They'll be finished with the paving.
Oh, good.
Yep. And then my last update is I want to say congratulations to Kristen, our new assistant town planner.
Awesome.
really hard, and she's amazing, so I'm really excited that she has the position. And she'll be official, I can't remember the date, but I think it's in a couple weeks. So we'll be hiring for a new administrative assistant.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So are we going to be losing Kristen at planning board meetings?
I think so.
Oh, I know,
I
but,
mean,
but now when I want to
I can take
complain about,
vacation. and-
now when I want to complain about traffic, I have somebody to complain to.
Yes. So Kristen's position will also staff the Affordable Housing Trust, and it will be focused on transportation and housing initiatives.
Great,
That's awesome.
wonderful,
Congratulations, Kristen.
That's
delightful.
great news.
Well deserved.
As far as town committees, I think we'll take that up on October 1st, see where we are on what we need to fill in.
That's the, yeah. Do we need, do they have a meeting coming up?
No.
Because one of the things to think about is whether we actually need somebody in Sustainable Westborough, and also whether it's time to dissolve the Master Plan Implementation Committee. So let's think about those, both of those things for the 1st of October. We have one set of minutes, I believe, November, John?
Any changes, comments, questions?
No?
Do I have a motion to
Fine with me.
approve the minutes of, I don't have it on my agenda, August 20, did you say August 21st
August
and
20th,
September 3rd?
20th and September.
August 20th and September 3rd? Yes, those?
I'll make a
No, but is that,
motion.
are those the correct dates?
August 20th, September 3rd.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of August 20th and September 3rd.
Second.
All in favor?
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, and we might want to think about, look at the upcoming meeting dates for November and December. Think about those for our next meeting as to whether we want any changes, depending on where they fall in the month. All right. Any other questions or comments for tonight? Otherwise, could I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Thank you very much.